We're on page 295, which is in the middle of the third essay, in the 17th paragraph of the third essay. And we were talking about the benefit of prayer, and specifically of making brachot, specifically of making blessings. One of the tremendous benefits of making blessings is that it leads to mindfulness, which is a big term that's in use today. Mindfulness, which is the ability to live in the moment and to be self-aware and to be aware of what is going on all around you, and to be aware of your interaction with the world that is around you. And a lot of times people use the terms prayer and meditation interactively, or exchangeably, but the truth is that prayer and meditation are two different things. Prayer is when you're focused on the object of prayer, which is Hashem, and meditation is more of an inward introspection. But prayer also has a meditative benefit, because when I pray, I'm making an affirmation of recognition of what I am experiencing in the moment. It only has the added aspect of not only am I acknowledging what I'm experiencing, but I'm also acknowledging that the giver of that experience, the provider of that experience, is the Ribono Shel Olam, is the master of the universe. Today, brain science is also very much in vogue, because everyone wants to know what's going on in this very complex machine. So I pulled up recently an article that having to do with prayer and meditation. And the author of this article writes that prayer and meditation are highly effective in lowering our reactivity to traumatic and negative events. Lately, I've been wondering just what the science is behind the act of prayer and meditation. What parts of our brains are activated or deactivated? How might such a ritual, regardless of personal faith or intention, affect our behavior? So to learn more, she says, I talked to several doctors, including Dr. David Spiegel, Associate Chair of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and Medical Director of the Center for Integrative Medicine at Stanford University. And he said as follows: praying involves the deeper parts of the brain, the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex, the mid, front, and back portions. These parts of the brain are involved in self-reflection and self-soothing. So what difference does that make? Well, anyway, they discovered this all using magnetic imaging. While the reflective regions of the brain are activated, parts of the brain associated with taking action are inactivated. Spiegel notes that while these reflective regions of the brain are activated, parts of the it's an interesting correlation that Spiegel says could play a role in why prayer helps people struggling with addictive urges. In one recent study conducted by NYU Langone Medical Center, members of Alcoholics Anonymous were placed in an MRI scanner and then shown drinking-related images to stimulate cravings. It worked, which sounds pretty cruel. But the cravings were soon after reduced when the participants, you guessed it, prayed. The MRI data showed changes in parts of the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for the control of emotion and the semantic reappraisal of emotion, the study cited. The link between deep reflection and decrease in action can be a useful one while dealing with a trauma or other negative situation. It's pretty simple. When we're praying, we can't be lashing out or kicking walls in. In other words, we can't react. This isn't to say that one should bottle up their anger or sorrow and lock it up in a prayer, but for the sheer purpose of self-care, prayer and meditation can be useful when we're barely able to cope. So it is an interesting coping mechanism. That's not what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was referring to when he talks about the benefits of making brachot, because he's talking about a person who is aware of his presence and his context within the larger world that Hashem is completely surrounding and pervasive in. And that's the type of pious or saintly person that we've been talking about. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi also acknowledges the benefits of being a mindful person through prayer, because the last thing that we left off with was how I can benefit. Is this thing running? Yeah. How I can benefit in life and increase my pleasure in life through making brachot. Remember we talked about that, when I'm about to take a bite of an apple, I think about the apple. I think about the sweetness. I think about the juiciness. I think about the crunchiness. I think about all of the things, the skin.
And the sound.
The sound. Thank you. Thank you for that sound effect. Thank you very much, Rachel. And so the whole idea is that I actually increase my pleasure in the moment because of the mindfulness that I have of that moment of pleasure that I'm experiencing. Remember, he gave the analogy of a person who goes to this amazing party, the party of the year, which has everything that a person who's a hedonistic, indulgent person would want to partake of. And so there's alcohol, and there's women, and all of these other things that are at the party, and loud music and everything. And of course, the next morning, he's told, we had an amazing party, but he doesn't remember any of it. Why? Because he drank too much. And of course, people think that drinking alcohol will enhance your pleasure, but it actually, when done in excess, actually removes pleasure from life because it numbs us to the experience. So anytime you numb yourself to an experience, you actually reduce the potential for experiencing that, whether painful or pleasant. So sometimes alcohol can be beneficial if you're going through a painful experience. But to use alcohol to go through a pleasurable experience is actually counterproductive, because then you can't experience it as fully as if you were completely focused with your intellect on what you're going through. So that's the benefit of brachos. A bracha allows you to focus your mental energy on the actual moment that you're getting. And that's why he says in subparagraph 3 on page 295, if one does not subscribe to this perspective of mindfulness, he should not think that the pleasure he does obtain in life is human pleasure. It is really animal pleasure, because he will not appreciate what he is getting, as we illustrated by the case of the drunkard.
Of the what? Sorry.
Of the drunkard.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So a lot of people have animal pleasure in life, right? And so you could say, well, what's wrong with animal pleasure? Nothing. But God didn't make you an animal. He made you a human being, so he expects you to enjoy his world as a human being would enjoy his world. He expects you not to eat your dinner the way an animal eats its dinner, by just gobbling it down and not experiencing the chewing experience and the taste and the mouthfeel of everything that you're consuming, right? I'm guilty of that. My parents always pointed out to me that I'm usually the first person to finish my meal at the table. So I have to learn more how to savor. That's the word I was looking for. How to savor the experience of eating. But that's what we're talking about. Now, we continue. So we're on subparagraph 4. The saintly person also allows his heart to internalize the meaning of each blessing that he utters. He understands the blessing's direct meaning as well as its indirect ramifications. So this is an important statement, that every line of the tefillah that we say on a daily basis has the simple meaning, and there are corollaries from the simple meaning. So that's why we have this concept called iyun tefillah. There's a whole discipline in Jewish study called the analysis of prayer. There are classes that are offered on iyun tefillah, because each line of davening has multiple levels of meaning to it. And they allude to different ideas and to different subtle concepts. For example, so when he's saying the bracha of Yotzer HaMa'oros, which is, we spent a lot of time on this bracha several weeks ago when we were going through the blessings of the Kriya Shema. We spent a lot of time on this bracha of Yotzer HaMa'oros, which is all about a person meditating and contemplating the fact that God created all of the luminaries, the sun, the moon, the stars, and all of the planetary bodies that are out there in our solar system and beyond, in our galaxy and in our universe. And he also contemplates the angels in the celestial realm. So when a person is making this bracha and he's saying the words, he contemplates the order of the cosmos, the great celestial bodies therein, and the tremendous benefit that flows from them. What do we mean by the tremendous benefit that flows from them? What do you think he means by that? What benefit do we get from the celestial bodies? We get warmth from the sun. We get time. We get the tides of the oceans from the moon. Right? We get to set our calendars. We get there's a lot of benefits. We get gravitational force. There's basically we couldn't exist without the celestial bodies. Okay, so he acknowledges that in God's eyes, they are like the smallest of insects. Now, this is where we just turned the page around. Now, page 296, and what he's saying is that not only is the simple understanding of the tefillah, which is I acknowledge the necessity and the greatness and the gift of the celestial bodies, but I also acknowledge that as huge as these heavenly bodies are, they are no more complex or important in God's eyes than the smallest of insects, despite the fact that they seem to be very great to us because of the great benefit they confer. The proof that this is the way God views them stems from the fact that God's wisdom and guidance in forming the ant and the bee involved no less wisdom or guidance than what was required to form the sun and its orbit. What is more, the signs of God's wisdom and providence are even more acute and wondrous within the ant and the bee because of their small size. So which is more difficult to create? Is it more difficult to create the moon, or is it more difficult to create an ant? Which requires more divine wisdom and divine skill? So Rabbi Yehuda Halevi suggests it requires more wisdom and skill, if you're God, to create an ant, which is animated and everything is miniaturized, right? So you got to have really, really tiny instruments in order to make an ant work properly, whereas the moon is just this lifeless ball, right? A rock in space. So if you're God, it's relatively easy to create a moon. It's much more difficult to create an ant. Okay, now this is not something that is a direct result of the words of the prayer, but it's a corollary of the prayer. Now, why is that important? Why is it important to have this in mind, that not only when I'm saying the bracha of Yotzer HaMa'oros, that I have to think about the complexity of the ant at the same time that I'm thinking about the wondrousness of the celestial bodies? Is it really important to connect everything together? So Rabbi Yehuda Levi provides us with one reason. He says it is helpful for one to ponder this so that the luminaries do not become too powerful in his eyes, and so that the Satan does not persuade him to follow those who worship the stars and believe that the celestial bodies can independently help or harm mankind. That's not the case. Rather, they act naturally just like wind and fire. This is why it says, when I would see the sun shining and the moon waxing, if I was seduced in my heart by them, then even if I put my hand to my mouth, it is still a serious crime, for I would have denied the God above. Now, this is a quote from the book of Iyov, where he says that I should not be so astonished and so in awe of the celestial bodies, because if so, I may come to forget Hashem and may place some kind of divine attribution to the celestial bodies themselves. So Rabbi Yehuda Levi is arguing is that it's helpful to put everything in context of all of creation so that you are able to see how God is in control of everything, not just the celestial bodies, because if you invest too much in the celestial bodies, you'll come to perhaps ascribe divinity to them, and that's not a good thing. Okay? I found a fascinating article. Once again, one of these things where modern science teaches us that everything is linked and connected. It's a 2-minute read. It's from a website called JSTOR, which provides scholarly articles on a number of different topics. You can take one and pass it around. It's called The Amazingly Complex World of Insect Navigation. Dung beetles, ants, and other insects navigate in mysterious ways. Dung beetles. Most people have seen footage of them rolling their balls of dung across the field like little loggers at a log rolling contest. The beetles use the dung either as a material where eggs can be laid or as food. I'm so glad that I'm not a dung beetle. The intricate movements that they use to roll the dung are incredible, but it's equally amazing how far they roll their spherical cargo. Moreover, they always roll the dung balls in a straight line. How do they know where they're going? Turns out they use a navigation technique mariners in the days of sailing ships would have recognized. Dung beetles navigate using the stars. The beetles take mental snapshots of celestial positions. By comparing the positions of stars or other celestial bodies during each snapshot, they can keep themselves on course. Insects don't have a lot going on in the brain department, but there's enough capacity to remember the positions of celestial bodies or create detailed compasses based on the types of light available. But what about during the day? Most insects, including the beetles, use the sun. Far from their nest, ants, for example, can orient themselves using the sun as a reference point. This even works when the sun is hidden by clouds. Just as a smart explorer brings a compass in case the GPS doesn't work, ants have a backup plan. When the sun is hidden, ants can orient themselves using polarized light, or light that only vibrates in one plane. As sunlight passes through the atmosphere, it excites electrons in all directions. Some properties of the atmosphere cause light to polarize or only excite electrons in one plane. These atmospheric properties cause different degrees of polarization at different angles to the sun. If ants can detect polarization, they can detect the angle of the sun and use the sun to navigate even if the sun is invisible. Not only can ants detect polarized light, their compound eye diverts polarized light and directs sunlight into completely different navigational systems. When both polarized and direct sunlight are present, the ants will rely first on the internal compass derived from polarized light. The only drawback is that ants have to learn their local sky first, drop them in an unfamiliar area, and they will not be able to orient themselves. Ants who were raised with only a restricted view of the sky could navigate, but made many mistakes based on missing data. Many different insects, including bees, navigate in this manner. Some of these navigation systems are incredibly sophisticated. Insects don't have a lot going on in the brain department, but there's enough capacity to remember. I guess this is a repeat of the sentence. It's enough to make you wonder what other kinds of intelligence exist in the animal kingdom that we just haven't noticed yet. And I thought this was an interesting article because of the connection that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi makes between insects and the sun and the other celestial bodies. It turns out that the other benefit of thinking about even the smallest of God's creations when you're thinking about the celestial bodies is not only not to deify the sun, but also to remind ourselves that everything is interconnected. That when we think about the sun and the moon and the stars, it's helpful to think about how everything, even the smallest component of creation that exists in this world, is affected in some way and relates in some way to even the largest of the heavenly bodies. So that everything in nature is linked to each other. We can think about photosynthesis and how the sun affects plant life. We can think about how our lives are affected through the sun and the moon and the stars. And we can think about how even insects rely on celestial bodies to be able to navigate and to know where they're going. So this is all part of the mindfulness techniques that a person is supposed to try and develop when they're in the course of prayer. And my only additional comment that we'll make, before we move on, is that we are so far afield of this goal when we talk about how we pray in our modern Jewish shtetelach, in our communities. Because when we gather to pray, invariably it's to dispense with our duty and to get through it as quickly as possible so we can go back to what we need to do with life. And it's a shame, because what Rabbi Yehuda Levi is trying to advocate is that we take prayer as a great opportunity to enhance our lives. And instead, what we dwell upon when we're in prayer is all of the things that we have to do, everything that we interrupted in order to go daven, and all the things that we have to do when we finish davening. And if that's our focus, then we've sort of lost out on the primary benefit of what it means to be a mindful prayer, a person who engages in mindful prayer. So this is certainly something to think about. Number one, our brain chemistry changes when we're in the midst of davening, so that it's beneficial for us medically, psychologically, to be able to engage in prayer. It's beneficial to us from a mindfulness point of view, and especially when we're thinking about prayer, the things that we ought to be thinking about are the words of the prayers themselves, especially when we think about the larger picture and the framework that Hashem created in this world, especially this bracha of Yotzer HaMa'oros, how everything is interconnected. The next section that we'll get to is we'll go a little bit further and we'll talk about the bracha of Ahava Rabbah a little bit more, even though we talked about it already, and that will save Emir Hashem for next.